Our director, Jeremy Xido, is originally from Detroit. He graduated cum laude in painting and comparative literature from Columbia University and trained at the Actors Studio. A Fulbright and Guggenheim recipient, he is the artistic co-director of performance film company Cabula 6. Voted Company of the Year 2009 by Ballotans and awarded Outstanding Artist of the Year 2010 by the Austrian Ministry of the Arts. His directing credits include the award-winning feature documentary Death Metal Angola, the 6-part Crime Europe series, the short documentary Macondo, and several short fiction films. Working as a dancer, actor, and filmmaker, he has performed and presented work worldwide on stage, TV, and in cinema. Please welcome Jeremy Xido. So it's a large topic.
Yeah.
Big.
Yeah.
Very big. And with a lot of moving parts. I think it's a masterful film. I think it's a wonderful storytelling. I think the way you put it together, the structure of it, and other things I'd really like to talk about. But before we get there, let's talk about A, how you got onto the idea, and B, how you put together the amount of enterprise. I saw the support, some of the support that came from this, because it's all over the world. It's a vast topic, a lot of different moving parts and constituencies. So where did it come from, the idea, and then how did you put the team together to make it?
So first of all, I just want to thank the festival, just for a moment. Jackie and Karen and Jamie and Jillian and everybody. It's an honor to be here, and it's lovely to be here with you, lovely folks. So thank you. It was an accident. I was living in New York at the time, and I had been commissioned or invited to create a new dance piece with the Mongolian military, which is a different story. And I was on my way to the airport, and I had to stop at a theater in New York where I was going to be performing when I got back at PS 122, and I went into the offices with my suitcase, and the artistic director, Vallejo Gantner at the time, was, we chatted, and then he said, well, where are you going? And I was like, oh, I'm going to Mongolia to go do this thing with the Mongolian military. And he was like, oh, did you read the New Yorker article? And I was like, about the Mongolian military? No. And he was like, no, about the dinosaurs. And I was like, no. And so he said, well, hold on. And he ran into the other room, and he printed off this article, this amazing article by Paige Williams. And for some reason, I guess the setting of the copier was such that he came out with this giant pieces of paper that was printed by accident. He was like, I'm so sorry. And he handed it to me, and I sort of rolled it up as a scroll and stuck it in my arm and ran off to the airport.
What year was this? What year?
This was 2014, 2015. And on the airplane, it was a long flight. I couldn't sleep, and so I unrolled the scroll, and I read this article, and I was smitten with dinosaurs. I suddenly became a 12-year-old child, and the article is about the sale of the Tarbosaurus bataar. And the article focused on the American man that had pieced together the Tarbosaurus bataar from many different Tarbosaurus bataar skeletons to sell on the floor of the auction house at the Heritage Auction House in New York. And there's this tiny little mention of this obscure paleontologist, a Mongolian paleontologist, sort of in one sentence of the article, named Bolorzetzik Minjin, who had been responsible for identifying that this skeleton had been stolen. And she was able to get the president of Mongolia involved, and they eventually stopped the sale. Or actually what happened is that the sale went through, but then they arrested the dinosaur on immigration charges. This is a true story. And there was a court case called the United States of America versus one Tyrannosaurus bataar skeleton. You can look it up, it's out there. Fascinating case.
And you think you've seen immigration problems.
You've seen immigration problems. What's that? They're eating the dog. Exactly. And then when I was in Mongolia, every time that we would finish rehearsal or have a break or whatever, I'd run off to the Natural History Museum. Well, it wasn't exactly a museum, but I would run off to the various places where there were dinosaur bones that were collected, and I tried to find the Minister of Culture, who was actually in Seattle at the time, bringing the Tarbosaurus bataar skeleton back to Mongolia, and so we sort of missed each other. But when I got back to New York, I looked up Bolor, and I invited her for lunch, and we met, and she started to tell me the story, and I was particularly fascinated by an Asian Asian woman scientist who in a completely male-dominated, white male-dominated scientific universe, who had somehow taken on the entire establishment, right, and had done a kind of a thing that hadn't been done before. And then when I started to find out that her brother was a paleontologist, and that her father had been a paleontologist, and that worked with the American Museum of Natural History, and that she comes from sort of paleontological royalty, I was sort of fascinated by her, and I asked if I could go with her on her next trip. And so we organized a trip to the Gobi to search out the sites where the Tarbosaurus bataar had come from.
And did you start filming then?
And we filmed that. So that was sort of the first month of the project. And initially I thought that the film would be about her, and it would be about this repatriator. It was this, and for a number of different reasons, the film had a number of starts and stops, which ultimately was, I think, fortuitous, because I started to understand that the story, for me, was really interesting as a global phenomenon, and that there are these invisible forces, or that people were operating in their own spheres, and that what the sort of ripple effects of whatever they were doing were affecting people on the opposite side of the globe, and that they were actually in some kind of mortal combat, but at a distance. And so we started to realize that there was a larger story, an ensemble piece, really, and then our Canadian producer Ina Fishman came on board, and we started to work with Nizar and Jing Mei and a couple of the other folks, and this ended up in Morocco, and and then the pandemic happened, everything shut down again, and then we started again, and it sort of built out from there, and we were kind of, I was hooked, but it was a very complex sort of multi-year project of going to these different places and trying to understand who were the different players, and for me, sort of the biggest coup in a way was being able to get Francois, because I had been, somebody years before I had met him had told me about him. It was a French man who ran a museum outside of Beijing, and he was about to buy a fossil from Francois, and then was flagged by Interpol, and he was like, the French have the capacity to disparage somebody that's at another level, and that is what he did. I've never heard such things said about another person as this man said about Francois, and I was like, God, I want to meet him, and then very slowly we approached Francois and sort of wined and dined him, or he wined and dined us. It was unclear, and then sort of struck up a friendship, and then began to film with him. And the first thing we filmed with Francois was at the Tucson Gem Show.
Right. So a quick question about the Tucson Gem Show. Yeah. When Nizar went to the Nat Geo show, yeah, was there an audience for that? Or was everybody at the gem show, in the fossil show?
It was packed. It was a packed
Oh, it was.
house,
Good. Good.
and everybody was at the gem show. So they sort of brought it together. I mean, everybody at the gem. I don't know if anybody here has been to the Tucson Gem Show. If you haven't, you must go. It is one of the most bizarre events that I've ever been at.
Imagine.
And they turn all these hotel rooms into little museums.
No, it's described well in the film, but 15 miles long.
15 miles, and it's and that from rock hounds to paleontologists to folks who are making jewelry to it's just a free for all. And Nizar would never go to the gem show, but he had been invited by Nat Geo
Right.
to do this thing, and then suddenly was there. But yes, there was Nizar he's a superstar in the paleontological world.
Well, as is Francois in a certain way, but I think you're right to say that Francois was an amazing coup for this because right away, let's just talk a little bit about structure here because it was a fascinating thing is we all choose how to tell stories in different ways. And to enter the film with that gorgeous cinematography and those two small children playing with plastic dinosaurs was just automatically bringing us in. And then we start to get that historical elements like this, that fossils are sacred objects because of their history, because of the deep time aspect of them, as well as other things. And then to have Francois or whoever it was that said, well, just because it's historical and scientific doesn't make it sacred.
Right.
And so we have those two balancing things. And then the title card.
Yeah.
So you've already established the story before the title card. And in a beautiful way, I have to say that opening shot of those kids with the little plastic dinosaurs is just wonderful piece of storytelling. But Francois, we quickly identify him as the nuance of what's going on here.
Yeah.
Because it's, as they say, he's not a scientist, he's not a dealer, he's not a seller, he's not a collector, he's all of those things and none of those things. So it's all the different constituencies in one person and with a French je ne sais quoi about him. So he's got that going on. So let's talk about the cinematography. It's amazing cinematography. Did that start right away when you went to Mongolia in the first place?
Yeah, so absolutely. So I had worked on my first film, Death Metal Angola. I worked with a Belgian cinematographer who is just, I think, one of the most talented, definitely the most talented documentary cinematographers that I've ever worked with, and cinematographer in general, named Johan Legray. And the moment that Bolor said yes, I called Johan because of, and he's extraordinary. And so we went on this adventure together. And Johan and I kind of established the sort of the language, the visual language of the film together. And one of the things that we were thinking a lot about were playing with perspective, right? So going, I ended up working with a number of different cinematographers just because of how the financing came in and who I had to work with and different things. And I kept trying to get to Johan to be at all of them, and it wasn't possible. And I was blessed that all of the cinematographers I worked with were extraordinary. But to try to bring them into the visual world, sort of the basic concepts that we were working with were thinking about from sort of the micro to the macro, and thinking about that there's heaven and there's earth, and these monkeys are suspended in between, right? And so that I was looking for images that would both be able to capture sort of the grandeur and the space, and sort of the something that is beyond human scale, and then going as far into something so that it again is beyond human scale, and then in the middle is the Hollywood close-up. It's the human concern with our own story and our own sort of. I don't want to disparagingly say sort of narcissistic kind of tendency to kind of center ourselves into everything, but I think that but the kind of myopia of our own perspective that is for me exemplified in that close-up, is in that image. The making of ourselves is as stars. Not that as the star, but this person and this person's story is the star. And so those were kind of the three elements that we were playing with visually, and we were able to maintain it, I think, pretty well throughout the
I think you did, absolutely. And I think that it starts with, obviously, the picture of the Gobi Desert, and then, which is vast, and all the places where the fossils are found are these vast places that are beyond scale. And as in the open lands in Africa and other places that are unspoiled and untouched, it does suggest prehistory. It does bring that, and that to have the scientists talking about that it was a river, that it was, that, and to create that, and then to go to the small children with the tiny dinosaurs, and, the bigger and the smaller, and some of the shots of people working on the fossils with a close-up of the hand, the human hand just brushing away with the tiny tools on these tiny little bits and trying to reconstruct. So I think that visual language really worked well, and it was so beautifully photographed. And then, so how did you, at the start, I mean, you'd identified your Mongolian sort of centerpiece, and you got Francois late. How did you identify the other protagonists? Well, so and then did you, after that, there's a two-part question. One, how do you identify them? And two, did you shoot them one at a time and then cut it all together, or were you shooting different people at different times all along?
Yeah. So we shot all of Bowler's footage all in that one go, in that early part, and then a little bit in New York. But mostly that we shot with Bowler. We identified, one of the things about Bowler's story is that it really sort of blew the lid off of this market, right? The black market in particular, and everything sort of changed after that, but it was sort of history. I mean, it was like 2012 is when that took place, and Bowler is very, is on the spectrum of people who believe that, there should be absolutely nothing sold, that there's nothing, that nobody can own a dinosaur, and that everything needs to be repatriated, right? And then we found Nizar, and one of the things about Nizar is that he had, he became famous for discovering the Spinosaurus with his team. Which was bigger than the T-Rex and was in whatever that Jurassic Park movie is where it actually killed the T-Rex, right? It became the African superstar. And Nizar sits in a more ambiguous place in which he, we had a researcher who ended up finding Nizar's story, and then he and I started talking, and I started to understand that really the center of the fossil industry or one of the primary centers of it as an industry is in Morocco, and that there the laws are vague. And Nizar, who was like a goody two-shoes, right? Like Nizar, you're out in the middle of the desert and he drinks milk. He's like his child sensibility he maintains, and is somehow throughout his career has maintained this childlike wonder, and is in in some ways one of the most corrupt and problematic fields of business, where there's this vast food chain, from dirt poor to the ultra rich, and he's somehow trying to navigate this, and he became fascinating to me, and so we had identified him in Francois. And we're filming back and forth between the two of them while filming with folks like Jack Horner, and then later on with Jingmei, who's just awesome. She's brilliant and a spitfire, and it's this other sort of perspective. And so we were kind of filming with all of them at different junctures.
Well, it was amazingly put together, and I think that back to the earlier awesome perspective on human beings, and when it gets to the marketplace and the auctions, and talking about how it's an ego war, and that's sort of the narcissism. It's the belt measuring of the very rich, and to salt these things away without a concern for the science, which is very big, for the deep time aspect, sort of almost mystical quantities, as well as the education, which I think Bowler was talking about with the moving museum, and you see, which it is, that childlike wonder about, many of us grew up in this area and went to the Natural History Museum and saw dinosaurs, and that was the first thing that we ever were just blown away by from an educational standpoint, for very obvious reasons. So to see ego wars going on and to put that human perspective on it with this vast topic. So again, I think the storytelling was great, and for the editing, since you were filming all around these different places and you had this sort of very complex story to tell. So what was the editing process like?
Complicated. It was and long. I mean, we had edited in parts. I had worked with on the Bolor footage early on. I'd worked with a brilliant editor from Barcelona named Elia Gasul Balada, who I've gone on to work with in other projects, who came on early, and we were sort of establishing that kind of language and universe, and then yeah, it was just the whole editing process was a little bit complex because of the pandemic, when we were finally putting all these other pieces together. We had an initial editor who ended up becoming very ill, and we couldn't work with her. She was amazing, and so we were working with several different editors at different junctures, but and did most of the editing in Canada, in Montreal, and then at the end worked with the finishing editor who was in Toronto.
No, it's hard to imagine with this complex of a story to have just one editor through the whole process anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, the pandemic didn't make anything easier for anyone. It's interesting. A lot of the documentaries we're seeing now are time-stamped by people wearing masks.
Wearing a mask.
You know, so it's just it's sort of an interesting way to go about it. So we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to ask the audience if they have questions for Jeremy. Oh, here, just wait for a microphone, please. It's coming your way.
Hi, and
Hi.
Congratulations. I just want to know what it was like for the first time to see the sky, the night sky in Mongolia.
I mean, it was confusing and overwhelming. You know, having lived for, you know, I mean, I grew up in Detroit and I lived in cities most of my life, and so and being in perhaps I think one of the spots with the least amount of light pollution on the globe. It was absolutely overwhelming and stunning.
Oh, it's just huge. It's just so huge, and it seems to be just, you know, the whole sky, and then you have sand, and some mountains maybe. But it must have been phenomenal, right? I just can't think of another place, because I'd love to be able to see that. I'm just trying to figure out how to do that.
Well, they have horseback tours. You could go with the Mongolian military.
Yeah, I know, but I can't dance the way I'm sure they can at this point. But anyway, that was wonderful. Thank you very much.
That and what a perfect way to end the film after talking about, you know, deep time as well as deep space and how small we are in a cosmological sense, and then how small we are in terms of time. And to show that night sky with the amount of comets and meteors that were flying through, it was just really a stunning way to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think one of the thoughts about it, like I sort of fought for that ending. It was a very it was a very soft, sort of silent kind of drifting off ending. But for me, what I had maintained, like kind of what had struck me is that you know, here we are with no idea of sort of how we got here, where we are, you know, and that all of the elements that we have to identify ourselves in time is by looking at the stars and looking at rocks, and that with that, those are the tools we work with to be able to flesh out some semblance of a story about our existence and the existence of the planet. And I felt like sort of stripping it down all the way to those basic tenets by the end is sort of, that's kind of what's left.
Well, and that's the question of perspective, because at the end of the day, when you look at all of that and you put it in those terms, it makes the wrangling over whether you can sell it or not and whether you can collect it or not and what you can do with it is so infinitesimal compared to what is sort of at stake, what the stakes are.
Yeah, I mean,
so really, I thought a brilliant way to end it. We have another question right here.
What a film. Thank you. Two questions. On balance, would you say Jurassic Park was good or bad for
for the history of cinema? Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I don't know if it, I mean, I think Jurassic Park unleashed a fascination for science. It's people often talk about paleontology as the gateway drug for science, right? It's like it's this moment of wonder. It's sort of and you can it's tangible. It's sort of and that leads people into issues of scientific inquiry, of science. That it sort of allows people to begin to question and to kind of start down that pathway. And I think that Jurassic Park, without a doubt, did that for generations. I mean, Jurassic Park was an inspiration for Nizar, as well as an inspiration for a number of the buyers, the cryptocurrency, folks that wanted to buy it, buy, Jacopo's Triceratops, and and Jack is at this really interesting place because on the one hand he is an educator at heart, and it was this unbelievable educational tool, and I think the unexpected thing happened, that is, it also unleashed other parts of human nature to want to have, to grasp. And so I don't think Jurassic Park did either one of those things. I think that it cast the light on something, but it was the unexpected consequence of, it was because of Jurassic Park that the value of Stan went up to $8 million. It was all in the 90s. And the moment that happened, it started the skull hunters hunting in Mongolia that had sort of devastated that sort of scientific field, of inquiry. That said, the American Museum of Natural History had been there for 100 years and had collected a vast number of fossils, which ended up in the museum with the promise of returning them after they had been studied. But those bones are still in the American Museum of Natural History. Bolor works upstairs with all of the Mongolian bones underneath, right? And so...
That wasn't actually my question. The real question is, they talked about the fifth extinction. Can you say a little bit more about what, the value of understanding what the sixth extinction will actually be?
Yeah, I think, we're in the middle of it, is what, and I think that the value, like when you talk with somebody like Jing Mei, that one of the things that she said, and what I love about Jing Mei is that, like, she's looking at the tiniest of things, right? And she's looking at what survived, right? And that the thought is like, okay, we're in the middle of this mass extinction in which there are species that are disappearing all around us. And then the question is about our own survival. How did certain animals survive previous extinctions and sort of these catastrophic events, and that others didn't? And are there lessons to be gleaned from that can pertain to the way in which we continue to live our lives now? And I think that's part of there's a part of, like, Jack thinks you just need to know everything, right? There should be no limits to what you can know. Jing Mei's, I think, believes the same, but she also has this other sort of sense about about our dire situation that many people don't recognize or see, but those who are involved day in, day out with studying animal life forms, watching them disappear, and have studied, historically, in deep time, the ways in which that have happened, recognize what we're in the midst of, that many people simply don't see, and will that information help us make different choices? Will it lead to certain kinds of discoveries that can prevent us and other life forms from disappearing, or not? Nizar is like, the Earth doesn't care. Like, it'll be fine. It's not about that. It's about us. It's about like us and our home and our life. How we want to live. Mother Earth is fine. Has been, will be.
One of the many values of the film is in terms of the way that you have identified what is the value of the fossil record. So what value do you put on it for education, for our own extinction, for money, for education, for all these different things? And there's different values involved for different people, different constituencies. I think we have time for one more question. Okay, in which case I want to go ahead. Go ahead. Wait a minute. Microphone.
Sorry. Hi. Best line I think I heard in a long time that made me stop and think was at the end of the film, where it was about, statement was made that we all know that all species will become extinct.
Yeah.
And that kind of summed up a lot of things for me. But I never stopped to think of the fact that there's not one species that ever has really survived. We will all become extinct. And I think that was like a very wonderful remark. Part of that is, it was wonderful. That's like my favorite.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So what's the future for the film?
So the film is now, it plays tomorrow in Marrakesh, if anybody is on their way to Morocco. There may be time to get there. And it's sort of living out its festival life. So it is continuing to play in festivals internationally. And that the plan at the moment is to have a theatrical release of the film in the spring, and Dogwolf are the sales agents, and they're working on a broader sale at the moment.
A distribution deal.
For a distribution deal, and so we're just sort of waiting to see how that lands. There was a deal that was in place with National Geographic, and then that deal, National Geographic was having problems, and that's not happening. But there are other sort of venues, and so there are pathways, and so we're just kind of waiting to see a little bit where it lands.
Well, I hope it has a long life and gets a lot of distribution, because it's definitely worth it. Thank you so much for sharing the film
Great,
with us.
thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.